Welcome to the true story of how my grandpa got shot down in World War II. The background to this story is that just as the Germans were bombing Britain, we had no choice really to bomb their factories and their docks and try and stop them being successful in the war like they were to us. And so my grandfather's job in the war was he was part of a bomber crew. He wasn't the pilot. His job was to do the radios and also check out, look and try and spot the other planes so that the man whose job was the gunner could try and shoot them down if German fighters came to try and attack their bomber. This is the story how one night on October the 10th in 1941, he was on a bombing mission and he got shot down. Hope you enjoy it. Just before I go, this book is as old as the war, and while he was in a prisoner of war camp because he got captured, he wrote the story down. He did it in secret. The front of the book looks like he's learning German in the school that they had in the prisoner camp. But if you turn the book upside down, on the back of the pages, there's secret bits of writing. And he still managed to keep this throughout the whole time in the camp. It's quite amazing that this book still exists. I feel quite lucky to own it. So, if you're sitting comfortably, I will start the story. It's very, very small writing, so occasionally I'll stutter as I try and read it. The story opens on October the 10th, 1941, which was a beautiful day in late autumn. Life was good, and I must admit that I had no inclination what would be decisive and what would happen that day. No doubt if I had, I should have had some misgivings. The day previously, he'd been to visit Doncaster and a friend of mine, and had returned back to the camp at about 9 o'clock. Coming back from having my chute and harness adjusted and collected my backpack and chute, I went to the hangar to fetch his earplugs and microphones and his flying helmet. At about 4 o'clock, he went for his tea. As we all filed out of the dining room, we saw posted on the board the lists for what was going to happen that night, and there was going to be a briefing at 5:30. My primary preparations consisted of going to my room, changing into his battle dress, putting on his flying sweater, his socks, his boots, after which I tidied up and headed towards the briefing room to learn as much as possible with my crew about the night's targets. The undercurrent of excitement and talking hung in the air in the squadron briefing room. There you'd see men working and chatting at their table, taking notes of all the information printed on the walls. And when the intelligence officer came in, all would be quiet to hear our orders and information, every possible kind that is necessary for the night's work. We were dismissed to go to our flying supper, of which we would assemble in the crew room. Our target that night was going to be the docks at Dunkirk. The flying supper passed, and down to the crew room we all went for the hustle and the bustle, ready before takeoff, which was going to be at 7:30. You could see the faces of the crew. A determination was there, but nobody ever chatted about the chance of not returning, even though it was always the first thing in their heads. Collecting our notes and information, books, implements, pencils, gun rations, all the thousands of other things an airman must have before the modern horror of a bombing raid, we climbed into the truck that would take us to our dispersal. When we'd been dropped by the plane, we were left in perfect quietness. We stood and viewed our kite. Didn't go in a kite, that's what they called their plane. It flew in a plane called a Hamden. There she was, Ave Apple, standing in a brooding silence, black and ugly, but an efficient piece of modern machinery. She was bombed up, fueled up, ammunition on board, guns tutted, window wireless in perfect order, in fact ready in every way for us to take off on our mission. With 10 minutes to go, we had all given our various parts of the machine a final check, and now we were having a rest on the grass. I was thinking of home and my next leave when the sound of the engines beginning to roar in the aerodrome brought me back to the present. We climbed in and settled down in our positions. I think there were 5 people on this plane. It was twilight as we roared across the runway on takeoff. We had been signalled up to the standing point and had swung in the direction with the kite quivering from end to end, with the curbed power that was trying to escape from the engines. As they had opened out, they deafened you and we were off once again. First bounce, then another and another, and now we were airborne. Slowly we gained height, our engines labouring hard as we slowly gained height. And as we did, I noticed again how the ground seemed to be moving slower and slower, and then at last we turned and headed for the enemy coast. Passing over England in the evening when we were on our way always brought a lump to my throat. It was such a beautiful sight. The quiet valleys, villages, comfortably nestled into them, and the rivers looked like threads of silver. As it grew darker, beacons began to flash. Sometimes, as you passed near a large town, a white beam would lift up and blinding you with its brightness, and then again darkness and the incessant throbbing drone of the engines. At last we passed over the English coast, and then beyond the surf and cliffs far, far below, and I wondered how many men had looked at the same sight and never returned. So he's off on his bombing mission. I wonder how it goes. I've been listening out on the radio when I heard over the intercom, targets should be coming up in 5 minutes. And then nothing else, just that. Going back to my other job, watching the sky for enemy aircraft fighters, I heard nothing from the crew. They were all busy doing their certain job. I noticed flak was beginning to show on our starboard. Flak are like explosions of things that are shot up to shoot the planes down. Little bombs basically going off in the air around them. For the first time, it looked for the world like little fireflies parading themselves for a second. But if you happened to be near them, they would tear and rip you apart. Nasty and vicious is flak any time. The searchlights as yet had not spotted us, or the flak came too near. But as we moved in their direction, they began to push their presence upon us. The sky was a sea of fire. Bursting shells were all around us, and we dived. We jumped to no avail. Everywhere we turned, those shells and bullets and searchlights followed us, seeking to blast us out of the night and smash us to the earth forever. Bomb doors open. We were nearly there now. Below, I could plainly see the docks with flashes coming from all over them. Light and heavy flak and strange things we had never seen before, like balls of fire joined together, were shooting up at us. To a person who could view target from a safe position, it must appear like a gigantic firework display, with the red flashes and flak shells, white of the flares, and the yellow, blue and white beams of the searchlights in the air, and the blue flashes of the guns, the pink of the burning bombs, with the glow of fires on the ground, all set against a backdrop of indigo. It was a truly enthralling sight. The feelings of a person high up in that inferno, in a pilot's seat while he's trying to do his job, is hard to define. Bombs gone. Looking down, I saw the messages of death drop silently away. At the same time, we shot up 100 feet through the sudden loss of weight, and then we dived striving to lose those persistent fingers of light. At last, we were away, and our nerves, which had been strained for minutes, began to relax. The relief that you experience is the same as those who've been to hell and back and come out of it. Steer 270 homeward, but cloud was piling up, cutting down our visibility. I asked to get radio assistance. I tried. No answer. Again and again, but no reply. It was dead, useless. We flew, and by now we were lost. The radio set was beyond repair. I'd sent over our SOS, and got no reply. We were lost, 4 men, not 5, in a bomber that was crippled. The silence of the crew was an indication of their thoughts, what we were going to do now. We soon discovered that, as the heavens opened up in a blaze of fire and light, the crump crump of flak, the wee zip of shrapnel and bullets, and then the searchlights caught us again and held us. We were helpless, buffeted and smashed and ripped to pieces. Bullets had torn a hole in the wings 2 feet from where I was sitting. I was petrified, spellbound, and yet my mind could think, reason. I had already told myself, if you're going to jump, it's now. And I prayed, yes, harder than ever in my life before. My knees were shaking. I could not control them. I could not control the nerves. And then came the order, abandon aircraft. The pilot had decided we'd reached the end. I told the gunner to use his gun, and as a last hope, he did. And as if by magic, the inferno ceased, giving us those few seconds we needed to escape. The observer was the first to go. We didn't know, and I crawled forward to see what had happened to him. As I slid under the pilot's seat, my feet went out of his escape hatch. As soon I pulled them in again, the nose was smashed, riddled with shrapnel and holes. The gunner by this time had jettisoned the door and was sitting on the edge of the hatch looking at me. I motioned for him to jump. Finally, I pushed him out with my foot. It was a sickly feeling watching him turn over and over. Would his parachute ever open? There it was. I smashed and ruined everything and collected all I had to take, as the last the observer had said was, we were over England. I lowered myself into the bottom position and warily sat my legs over the edge, plunging into something. The pilot asked if I'd gone. I told him I was ready, and then I saw fire creeping along the plane. My hand was on the ripcord of my parachute, and I had a last look, and then giving one look down to the ground, 12,000 feet below, I jumped out head first. The sensation I was trying to describe it would be of unexplainable comfort. I was turning over and over, and I was in no rush to hurry to open my parachute. During one of my loops, I caught my last glimpse of the kite, burning well now, diving earthwards, and then I pulled my ripcord. Whoosh! The pilot chute flashed past my face, dragging the main chute after it, and then a tug so fierce on my stomach and shoulders that it made me scream 2 or 3 times. I nearly passed out, and I managed to relieve the cause of the trouble a little. When I started to look around, I had the feeling of being stuck, even going up instead of down, and then dropping onto some clouds. I caught a glimpse of the earth shrouded in darkness far below. It was impossible. Something quiet, anything, to distinguish anything apart from the coastline, and I realised with shock, if I did land in the drink, it would be finished. Drink is the sea, so he's worried he's going to land in the water. But as luck would have it, I was being blown inland. The quietness after the roar of the engines was quite strange. For the first few minutes, it was that quiet, it deafened you. Looking down, I noticed the ground seemed to be moving away in all directions at an alarming rate, and then, crash, I hit the ground, and I knew no more. I'd been knocked out by being dragged over. Backwards, when I came round, all I could see were trees and the stars. I had luckily landed in a clearing about 30 yards square, covered in spruce trees. The chute was caught in a tree and was ruined. Eventually I sat up and took stock of my position and tried to collect my shattered nerves, as by now the reaction of the last few hours was settling in, and I started out of the woods. Well, how I was discovered, I was in Nazi-occupied Germany, Nazi-occupied country, and my 3 weeks walk and finding my capture is another story. So with that, readers, I will close. I hope I've been able to give a pretty good idea of what it is like to be shot down, and I hope this story wasn't in vain. The end. And he kept this book all the way through the war, and his family have got it now. So that is a pretty amazing story. Quickly, his other story was, he was captured, he spent all the war in prisoner war camps, and he spent some of it in the camp that's known for the story The Great Escape. He didn't actually escape, but he was in that camp. So I hope that might have given you some ideas for your writing, that was my grandpa's true story.